Rush's self-titled debut album was a good offering, a good first release. One that is certainly a little bit overlooked, I feel, among the Rushiverse, considering it had a very different style by comparison to what we would know and love Rush for. But it laid enough of the foundation that whenever Rush was going to transition and blossom into the progressive rock giant, the band that so many people know and so many people love, they could easily harken back to these earlier moments and really understand the foundation that the band was kind of rooted in. Fly By Night is one that helped to further establish that. If there's one thing that I myself, as a reviewer and as a music fan, really enjoy about bands is whenever I watch them kind of morph and become into something a lot greater than that which they began as. If they do something very well the first time around, or throughout the first initial part of their career, that's fine, but if you're able to add dynamics and layers to that and actually give your sound a little bit more to work with and actually give yourself a greater opportunity to succeed and a far greater repertoire to kind of dig with, well, then you have yourself one heck of a career on your hands. Musical evolution, musical step-up process, practically, is what you could call it, and Fly By Night certainly exhibited this. This is an album that feels very much like the debut in its length and in its makeup, with there being only 8 tracks on it. However, the composition and the overall songwriting definitely has a marked change. The inclusion of Neil Peart certainly is one that is extremely obvious as a tremendous influential upgrade that the band was able to score after the release of their debut. Now, Fly By Night didn't exactly have Working Man, but Fly By Night itself, the self-titled song off of the album, is a single that you can still sometimes hear on radio today, and it's one that definitely has all the makings and the feelings of a 1970s radio single. It's one that has enough dynamics and one that has enough of an individuality to it to truly shine above a lot of the other songs and the other bands of the time. It's no longer Rush that sounds like the Led Zeppelin clone, it's instead Rush that sounds like Rush. Geddy is still using that high-pitched falsetto, but it's one that has a lot more confidence behind it and a lot less parody. And this is still a great song to jam to, considering it's from the earliest days of the band. But then you look at the way in which the band expanded their repertoire into that progressive territory, where they decided to really bulk up the songwriting structure and the composition of their pieces in order to allow for a lot more compositional freedom and allowed a lot more exploration. It gave them the opportunity as songwriters to step back and really examine just all of their capabilities, and they were able to showcase it on such famous tracks now, such as By-Tor The Snow Dog. But then you also have the third side. You have the third element of Rush, which is seen, I think, in songs like Making Memories, where it still has that nice hard rock approach to it, that hard rock moxie to it, that feeling where it just... They were a band that easily could have taken a couple of different courses, but instead of just staying with one, they were able to combine 3 practically: a hard rock, a progressive rock, and even at times a progressive metal, very conceptual rock type opera environment in order to really create just wonderful music. This is all stuff that we'll see a little bit further down the line once we reach, the legendary albums such as 2112, but right now, this early foundation is already taking strong shape. Fly By Night, I really feel, has the self-titled debut beat just by a little bit, and it's really kind of unfair to try to assess the 2 albums. Even though they are so closely linked, they still feel as though they are in 2 completely different ballparks. We have the debut that is just so rich and ripe with that hard rock ability. If you ever wondered what it would sound like for Rush to be a Led Zeppelin-like product, for Rush to kind of filter in those styles of influences and those types of ideas and kind of be within that spectrum of music, listen to that record. But Fly By Night reminds me a little bit more about what Rush was set to become. This is the true starting point of the progressive rock Rush approach that we saw and really so many of us loved in the 1970s. This is a strong album that consistently flows from one track to the next. They're definitely getting down that sense of balance and that sense of really keeping everything together. And as the albums would start to pile up in this decade, you would see that Rush was willing to examine with very, very different structures. They were willing to examine longer, lengthier pieces that almost seems like exercises in excess at times, but all of them tended to have a point. Fly By Night hasn't quite gotten us to that level yet. However, Fly By Night has established that foundation. Fly By Night, like the self-titled album before it, has given the band something that every band really needs, and that's room for further development, room for continued growth, and room for them to add new facets, new trinkets, new tricks, and new traits to their sound in order to build an even more dynamic, an even more unpredictable, and an even better product. I like Fly By Night a good bit. This is an album that I feel really has a strong sentiment toward being the launch pad of the band, the launch point, the point in which this band really got on the radar, got on the map, and started to establish their own unique identity. I felt that the self-titled had a little bit too much parody, even though it did differentiate itself from the other bands of its time in small locations. This was the album in Fly By Night where those differences now started to become separations, things that crafted individuality within the scene, and it was an album where that was absolutely 100% necessary. But now we move on. We move on to a point in the band where maybe that individuality and everything that has been set by Fly By Night wasn't something that instantaneously crafted results. We're going to have to take a look at album number 3 and see if that is what happened.